body of work that extends some 20 years in the making, there are so many ways I could have introduced principle number 10 of 10 for advancing Black feminism and public health to pursue collective empowerment, activism, and social justice. In fact, this is the one principle I am often invited to speak on as a lecturer and keynote speaker for various public health events. However, for this HPHR fellowship, and perhaps because this season coincides with the continued COVID crisis and related social and structural determinants of health, I decided to do something a little different. I want to change the conversation about the power and potential of collective empowerment, activism, and social justice using just one word. And that word is, you guessed it, believe. So we'll begin with the B. The B in believe is for behavior. If we believe in collective empowerment, then our advocacy behavior should reflect what we believe collectively. If we believe that our public health and healthcare systems and associated social and structural systems are broken and full of biases, then we must be brave enough to behave in ways that break down old, antiquated practices and build a system that is inherently just and fair for all. Dr. Dorothy Height, who reigned for 40 years as president of the National Council of Negro Women, reminds us to behave like we believe in collective empowerment. And I quote, "We have to realize we are building a movement. We cannot afford to be separate. We have to see that all of us are in the same boat." The E in believe is for empathy. If we believe in collective empowerment, activism, and social justice, then we will show empathy for fights against inequality that are not necessarily our own, but rather showing up as allies in other people's movement, knowing full well that the powers that be benefit all the more when we are all preoccupied with infighting and backbiting, and especially when we start to believe that there are scarce resources to advance our individual advocacy work. Civil rights journalist Ida B. Wells Barnett reminds us that we must have empathy for other marginalized groups in a quote, where she says, "I do not see how colored women can be true to themselves unless they demand recognition for themselves and those they represent." The L in believe is for learn. If we believe in collective empowerment, activism, and social justice, then we will immerse ourselves in learning communities that happen, get this, outside of the academy and literally in the community, where we learn from listening to lived experiences. When it comes to learning, I believe that our capacity and passion to be lifelong learners sets us apart as a distinct subgroup of advocates with a unique opportunity to use intellectual privilege to break down dysfunctional and disempowering policies and practices. Margaret Murray Washington, educator, activist, and wife of Booker T. Washington, had this to say about learning communities. "Where a community of women begins to think, there is sure to be action, the results of which will be their general intellectual development." So I say to all of us that we must keep learning. The I in believe is for imagination. If we believe in collective empowerment, activism, and social justice, then we must use our imagination to generate and support innovative initiatives and interventions that surmount to new ways of solving old, persistent, and wicked problems. I believe that collective empowerment means bringing a sociological imagination to public health, where we shift repeated narratives of personal troubles to one of systemic problems. And that shift is closely followed by relevant interventions that also address the trauma associated with historical pain. Shirley Chisholm, U.S. Congresswoman, civil rights activist, and educator, challenges us to not get bogged down with imagination and idea generation to the point we forget to progress. She said, and I quote, You don't make progress by standing on the sidelines whimpering and complaining. You make progress by implementing ideas. So even if we fail on some things, collectively, we have to start to implement some things and do it in a timely manner. Eradicate. The second E in believe is for eradicate. If we believe in collective empowerment, activism, and social justice, then we are unapologetically about the end goal, that is to eradicate inequity as it manifests in everyday life. Now, if time permits, I invite you actually to read my blog number 5 on principle number 5 for advancing Black feminism in public health, where I challenged the matrix of domination. It was in that blog that I quoted Audre Lorde as having asked the rhetorical question to white feminists during a 1979 conference aimed at addressing gender inequity. And in my Audre Lorde voice, what does it mean when the tools of a racist patriarchy are used to examine the fruits of that same patriarchy? It means that only the most narrow parameters of change are possible and allowable. Later in that same speech, Lorde continued to answer her rhetorical question when she affirmed that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And so, in Audre Lorde fashion, never forget that if we want to change the negative trends, statistics, and poor outcomes, we must disrupt the normal of those who benefit directly and indirectly from at least some portions of the patriarchal system as it exists. And in like manner, we must challenge the slow pace and those narrow parameters that are being allowed towards eradicating poor health among Black women and girls. The V in believe is for value. If we believe in collective empowerment, activism, and social justice, then we will find common ground based on our shared values. Sharing values with others in the struggle inspires us to work together through difficult days and dark nights. Let me say something about values in terms of my work. When it comes to value, as a behavior scientist, very few things excite me more than discovering that my research is showing evidence of being scientifically significant, right? However, my passion for a strong p-value is tempered by the value that I place on the viewpoints of vulnerable people everywhere. And so, in the pursuit of collective empowerment, we must demonstrate just how much we value diverse groups of vulnerable people when we invite them to the table in the spirit of participatory democracy. Participatory democracy as a guiding principle in collective empowerment means we value sharing the spotlight. We value sharing the leadership. And we value sharing the success with diverse representatives in our fight for equity. In the words of Ella Baker, civil rights activist and affectionately known as the godmother of SNCC, and it was actually in studying her work that I learned about participatory democracy when she was moving college students from the margins to the center of the civil rights movement. And she had this to say about her work: give light and the people will find the way. We have to value giving the light and allowing the people to find their way. And the final E in believe is for embrace. If we believe in collective empowerment, activism, and social justice, then we will embrace our responsibility for enlightening, educating, and empowering the next generation of scholar activists. And if you share my approach to embracing the next generation of Black girl scholar activists, then I invite you to help me lift as we climb in my personal and professional mission to mentor the next generation of Black girl thinkers in public health. I believe the pursuit of collective empowerment, activism, and social justice must be fueled by pouring into promising young scholars who will be responsible for collecting, preserving, interpreting, and telling the truth about the health and wellness of vulnerable people everywhere. I believe this so much so that I have established the Francis Ash Goins Scholarship, where 15 young Black women will receive $1,500 scholarships named after Francis Ash Goins, who is a living legend and pioneer in women's health in general and Black women's health in particular. Not only will they receive a $1,500 stipend renewable annually after they are officially enrolled in undergraduate and graduate programs, but they will also be members of my Black Girls think tank, where they will engage in monthly mentoring sessions with leading public health experts across disciplines, where they will be challenged to what? Put their intellectual capital to work in thinking through and following through, that is important, and following through on solutions to some of the most wicked yet winnable health and social battles of our time. My inspiration for launching the Francis Ash Goins Scholarship in Public Health and the related Black Girls Think Tank mentoring program stems from the way in which I was exposed by the Black educated and elite members of my community during my everyday life as a disadvantaged youth growing up in the inner city of Atlanta. I believe that this group of Black talented, educated elites who took me under their wings in sponsorship and mentorship were themselves embracing the call to action by suffrage activist Mary Church Terrell to the Black educated and elite of her times when she challenged them in this way. And so lift as we climb, onward and upward we go, struggling and striving, and hoping that the buds and blossom of our desires will burst into glorious fruition ere long. With courage born of success achieved in the past, with a keen sense of the responsibility which we shall continue to assume, we look forward to a future large with promise and hope. And I close with this. When it comes to addressing inequities in all of its shapes and forms, you just gotta believe in the power and potential of collective empowerment.